You are sitting alone in a room. Nobody else is there. You know that. And yet something shifts. A prickling sensation on the back of your neck. A quiet, irrational certainty that something behind you is paying attention. You turn around. Nothing. But the feeling was so real. So specific. So much like being watched. Where does that come from? And why does almost every human being on Earth know exactly what that feeling is? The answer reaches back into evolutionary history, into the architecture of your visual system, and into a region of your brain that processes social information so automatically and so rapidly that it bypasses your conscious awareness entirely. The feeling of being watched is not a superstition. It is not a quirk. It is the output of a surveillance system your brain has been running since long before you were born, and understanding how it works reveals something fundamental about what human beings actually are. Start with the eyes. Your eyes are unusual. Compared to every other primate, your eyes have an extraordinarily large white region, the sclera, surrounding the iris. In chimpanzees, gorillas, and most other primates, the sclera is dark or hidden, making it very difficult to tell where the animal is looking. In humans, the white sclera is clearly visible and creates a high-contrast display that makes gaze direction immediately and precisely readable from a significant distance. You can tell, almost instantly, exactly where another person is looking. And crucially, they can tell where you are looking. Developmental psychologist Simon Baron-Cohen at Cambridge University, whose work on theory of mind and autism transformed how scientists understand social cognition, has described the eyes as the windows to the soul, not as poetry but as literal mechanism. The human eye evolved, he argues, to be a gaze signaling device. The visibility of the sclera is an adaptation, not an accident. It allows humans to coordinate attention, to follow each other's gaze, to share focus on objects and events in the environment, which is one of the foundational building blocks of human language, culture, and social life. The conspicuousness of human eyes is not a vulnerability. It is a communication system. But it is also a detection system. And this is where the feeling of being watched enters the picture. Your brain contains a network of regions devoted to processing social information, and within that network there are structures specialized specifically for detecting and processing faces and eyes. The fusiform face area responds preferentially to faces. The superior temporal sulcus tracks gaze direction. The amygdala responds to the emotional significance of eye contact. And these systems operate at extraordinary speed, well below the threshold of conscious awareness. Neuroscientist Arne Ohman at the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm has spent decades studying the way the brain processes threat-relevant social stimuli, and his research demonstrates something striking. Faces, and particularly eyes, are processed by the brain through what he calls a low road, a rapid subcortical pathway that delivers threat-relevant information to the amygdala before the visual cortex has had time to produce a fully conscious image. You react to the presence of watching eyes before you are consciously aware of seeing them. The feeling arrives before the knowledge. This is why the back of the neck prickles when someone is looking at you. It is not mystical. It is your threat detection system responding to gaze, which throughout evolutionary history was one of the most significant threat signals available. A predator's eyes meant a predator's attention. A rival's eyes meant a rival's attention. Either way, gaze from a nearby source was information that demanded immediate response. The brain that responded to gaze detection automatically and rapidly, the brain that did not need to consciously deliberate before reacting, was the brain that survived. Psychologist Rupert Sheldrake has written extensively about the sense of being stared at, and his experiments on the phenomenon have generated significant controversy. In his studies, participants sitting with their backs to observers reported feeling watched significantly more often during trials when they actually were being watched than during trials when they were not. Sheldrake interpreted these results as evidence of a genuine perceptual capacity, a kind of extended sensory awareness. Most neuroscientists have offered more conventional explanations, including microcues from ambient sound, changes in breathing patterns, and subtle environmental shifts that might register below conscious awareness. What is less controversial is the neural reality underlying the phenomenon. Research by Colin Clifford at the University of New South Wales has demonstrated that the visual system is extraordinarily sensitive to gaze direction. In carefully controlled experiments, participants could detect when eyes were directed at them versus away from them even when the difference in gaze angle was just a few degrees. The system is precise, fast, and operates largely without deliberate effort. And because it is fast and automatic, it also sometimes fires on incomplete or ambiguous information. This is where the false positives come in. Your brain's gaze detection system is tuned for sensitivity rather than specificity. It is better to falsely detect a watching presence that is not there than to miss a real watching presence that is. The cost of a false positive is a moment of unnecessary alertness. The cost of a false negative, in an environment containing real predators and real rivals, was potentially death. So the system errs consistently on the side of detection. It sees gaze where there is none. It generates the feeling of being watched from environmental cues that are ambiguous or incomplete. It creates the sensation in response to sounds, shadows, peripheral movements, and other signals that cannot be definitively ruled out as indicating a watching presence. This is why people feel watched in dark rooms, in forests at night, in large empty buildings. The absence of clear visual information does not reassure the threat detection system. It activates it. Because in evolutionary history, darkness and concealment were exactly the conditions under which a watching presence was most likely and most dangerous. The system also extends into social perception in fascinating ways. Research on the so-called mutual gaze effect shows that eye contact is processed as uniquely significant by the brain. When two people make eye contact, both amygdalae activate. The experience of being truly seen, of having another consciousness fully directed at you, is neurologically distinct from any other kind of social contact. This is why eye contact can feel intimate, confrontational, warm, threatening, or electric depending on context. The neural system responding to it is ancient and sensitive, and it was designed for high-stakes environments where the intentions behind another pair of eyes could mean everything. And this is what the feeling of being watched ultimately reveals. You are not simply a rational observer moving through a neutral physical environment. You are a deeply social creature, wired from birth to be exquisitely sensitive to the presence and attention of other minds. The back of your neck is listening for eyes. The peripheral vision is scanning for faces. The amygdala is running a continuous background process checking for gaze. Most of the time, in the ordinary environments of modern life, this system generates false positives. It creates the sensation of being watched when nobody is watching. But the system itself is real. And the sensation it generates, that specific, unmistakable feeling of another consciousness attending to you, is one of the most distinctly human experiences there is. It is the feeling of a social brain running the program it was built to run, in a world that no longer requires it as urgently, but cannot shut it off. You are sitting alone in a room. Nobody else is there. You know that. And yet the back of your neck says otherwise. That is not superstition. That is millions of years of social evolution, still running, still watching, still convinced that something might be watching back.